everyone, welcome to this Brandgym Academy workshop on brand-led growth in 2022. The workshop will be led by David Taylor, founder of the Brandgym, a global team of senior brand coaches helping teams create brand-led growth. David is also director of the Brandgym Academy, Brandgym's global centre for research, development and learning. David has been named one of the world's 50 leading marketing thinkers of the Chartered Institute of Marketing and is also been elected as the Fellow of the Marketing Society. As we're in Zoom, if you have any general comments or technical questions today, you can contact anyone in the chat box below. And any questions that you'd like to pose to David at the end, please use the Q&A box. Now, I think that's everything from me, so it's my pleasure to welcome David to the virtual stage.
Thanks very much, Cameron. A warm welcome from me to everyone joining us today. Great to see so many people signing in from all over the world. Welcome to this webinar workshop on creating brand-led growth in 2022. Now, just before we get started, I want to just check that you're actually in the right workshop. Okay. Now, this workshop is for ambitious marketeers who want to achieve their full potential to drive brand growth. It's not for marketeers happy with steady progress, interested in a more academic approach to brand management. Okay, we're about brand growth, which is much more proactive, dynamic, and forward-looking. So hopefully you're in the right workshop. If you're not, then maybe feel free to go and grab a cup of tea and do something else. But I'm sure most of you are here with the idea of looking and learning about growth. Now, what we're going to explore in this workshop is three main things. First of all, I want to talk about the limiting factors that actually hold back marketeers from achieving their full potential. I'm then going to talk through some really interesting growth stories from some of the most inspiring brand leaders that I've worked with over the last 30 years. And then I'm going to share a four-step approach that can help you boost your effectiveness at driving brand growth. I'll also talk briefly at the end about a new approach to building marketing capability that I've been working on for the last 18 months as one way of achieving your full potential. The workshop's part of the Brandgym Academy, which is something that I lead. We do research, both Brandgym research and looking at outside what's happening in the marketing world. We develop tools and methodologies, and then we do learning through events such as this webinar today and through the Mastering Brand Growth program that I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. And I'm going to draw on some of the experience that I've had over the last 35 years in branding, which included starting at Procter & Gamble, then starting Added Value, which is now called Kantar in '94, and then 20 years ago, almost to the month, starting the Brandgym, which is this global team of brand consultants. And what I want to draw on is, on the one hand, the project experience. So from over 1,000 projects working with leading brands, both in the consumer space, such as AB InBev, Unilever, WD-40, in the service brand space, and also even fortunately enough to work on some of the sort of more luxury lifestyle brands, such as LVMH, Cartier and Nespresso, and also drawing on the learning and research from our series of 8 Brandgym books, which we've published. And if you stick around till the end, there's a Q&A, which last time proved to be pretty lively and a good debate, and also a little exclusive offer for workshop attendees. So let's dive in and look at these limiting factors that actually hold marketers back from fulfilling their full potential. And the first one of these is lack of focus. That's in terms of products, it could be in terms of brands, or it just could be in terms of projects that you're working on. And why this happens is what I call the new toy syndrome. So marketers tend to be very obsessed with novelty and new stuff, and this can cause a proliferation of different projects, brands, products, and priorities that people are working on. And the negative impact of that is that you fragment effort. Now, you may have been in a team where you felt like this, different people running in different directions all over the field, not really all aligned, working towards the same objective. Now, if you can arrive at focus in terms of your brands and product portfolio, suddenly we have all our players organised, structured, focused, aligned, and heading in the same direction towards the same goal. And this has two benefits, this focus. The first benefit is the commonly termed ROI, return on investment. That's about getting the maximum bang for your branding buck. But the second benefit is what I call ROT, return on talent. So this is making sure that our most talented, high potential marketeers are focused also on the right priorities. And that also goes beyond the marketing team to the broader organisation, getting the organisation focused behind the right initiatives. A growth story that illustrates this is the story of Nontokozo Madinsela. She's the CMO of the group at Momentum Metropolitan, which is a leading South African insurance business. Now, when we started working with Nontokozo, she had this, and the team had this sort of set of Lego bricks, which were different insurance brands. Momentum was one brand, Metropolitan, the MMI corporate brand, Guard Risk, Multiply, which was a rewards program. And it felt a little bit like these bricks were a bit of a jumble. Lots of potential, but not really working together in an aligned way. Now, as a result of working on a focused portfolio strategy, we were able to identify 2 priority brands. So to cut through all of that complexity and focus down on 2 key brands. The Momentum brand, which was targeted specifically at higher income, more aspiring achievers in the market. And the brand idea that summarized that was for your journey to success. And then the second brand, Metropolitan, was targeted primarily at lower income, simple solution seekers. And the idea there was together we can. So all about the power of the collective coming together to achieve more short-term objectives. And you can see then how this starts to play out in the mix. So on the Momentum side, it was all about success, it was digitally led, and it had a wide product offer to meet the needs of the more sophisticated consumer. And the idea there we saw for your journey to success. Whereas Metropolitan was more about togetherness, it was advisor-led, tapping into a network of real-life human advisors in the branches, and a much more simple product offer focused on the funeral care offer, which is critical for that target audience. So you can see there, they went from this set of Lego bricks that was a jumble into something much more simple, much more focused, and much clearer. And the group, since the project happened, has had some stability and then some really nice growth. Clearly, that has lots of factors affecting it, but the feedback we've had is that that portfolio strategy and really focusing and aligning the organisation behind those 2 key brands was certainly a contributing factor to that. The second limiting factor is having a lack of clarity in terms of brand purpose. So when we did Brandgym research on the question of brand purpose with marketing directors around the world, we found that 50% of marketing directors felt that brand purpose was either not effective or they were neutral. Only half the audience felt that it was being fully effective. And part of the reason for that is this idea of laddering and laddering up too high so that you lose touch with reality. So this fantastic cartoon, I'm going to use a couple of them from Tom Fishburne, where we have a salty snack, starting out with salty crunchy, going up to sharing, then family, and then eventually world peace. So this idea of taking on and almost feeling obliged to become what I call an activist brand. So feeling that you have to be like Ben & Jerry's or Patagonia. And the problem with that is that, as I said, you can lose touch with reality. So here's a beer brand, a Spanish beer brand, Estrella Damm. They produced this film called Another Way of Living. It was an underwater ballet dancer. Looks a bit like, is this plastic? Is it a jellyfish? And it was all about protecting the ocean, which is a highly worthy cause, but the link back to the product and back to the reality of the business is not really completely clear. And the problem with this is that it can lose focus on growth. The high-profile example of the CEO of Danone, Emmanuel Faber, who I think is a very brilliant guy, very talented apparently, but the feeling from investors was there was too much focus away from driving growth. He ended up leaving the business. And then more recently, you might have seen the press coverage of Unilever, a very, very high profile, powerful investor who's heavily invested in Unilever, feels that they've lost the plot on purpose by fixating too much on sustainability and not so much on the fundamentals of the brand and driving growth. So what we would recommend is a product-led approach to brand purpose that drives the whole mix. So rooting yourself in your product, also thinking about the people and planet aspect of the brand purpose, but then very much focusing on driving profit. So the distinctive role that your brand plays in improving everyday life that inspires growth. And the benefit of this is that you're going to be much more relevant to consumers, because when we looked at consumer research and asked consumers their main reason for brand choice, 38% were focused on the product, a further 52% it was product and sustainability, but only 10% were actually focused on sustainability alone. So if you're going out single-mindedly putting a lot of effort just behind that idea separated from your product, you risk losing relevance. A growth story that illustrates the power of doing purpose right is one from one of my favourite brands, BN, which if you live in France you will know. This is a goûter biscuit that was traditionally consumed in the afternoon goûter break when kids come home from school. And this is a story from Yann Lecramp, who is a marketing director of the Pladis France business. Now you can see there an image of a little boy taking a bite into the smiley biscuit, very iconic product, very famous, with a smiley face, and the idea being that it makes you feel happy and you get that delicious chocolate biscuit experience. Now the challenge was this brand had actually strayed a little bit away from that core product and that core idea. They'd gone after teenagers. They had a product called BN Sensations. You might be able to see in the picture there. It's a wafer biscuit. There's no smile there. So felt like it was straying a little bit away from the anchoring into that sort of core product. Now, the key here on brand purpose to make sure that it's relevant and product-led is really rooting yourself in deep insight. In the case of BN, there was some fascinating cultural insight about the state of being a kid in France at the moment. There's an article here that talks about burnout of kids when the little ones crumble. So a lot of pressure on kids. If you think about the current environment we live in, you think about the threat of global warming, you think about what's happened in the last 2 years in the world, a lot of pressure on kids. And there was this beautiful product truth about BN, which is this smiley biscuit, highly distinctive, which tastes delicious, but also makes you feel happy. And there was a real opportunity to get that link back between the cultural truth and the human truth and the product truth and root the brand back into that. And the brand idea that came out of that process was this idea, goûter au sourire, taste the smile. So literally you're tasting the smile by biting the biscuit and having that delicious chocolatey experience that makes you feel happy. And this was driven through the mix. So the visual identity, the smiley biscuit's still there in pride of place, but if you can notice there, the new little change was to integrate the smile actually into the BN logo. So the smile is now embedded into the visual identity of the brand. And you can see how that was used in the previous slide at the end of the comms. The product itself, the team upgraded the product to make it even more delicious. And in terms of the people and planet side of things, you can see there this idea at the bottom, toujours fait en France. En France means, made in France with 100% French wheat. So there's a little bit there in terms of the sort of sustainability and the local provenance side of things. And then also communication, which dramatized the story of a little boy who was struggling at judo. His dad inspired him to pick himself up and carry on and keep going with the BN smiley biscuit giving him that moment of joy. So here's the dad sort of playing with the biscuit, having a moment of fun, that moment of complicité, as we say in French, between the son and the father. And you can see here from a comm standpoint versus the benchmarks for Ipsos, that notice and remember was up 43% versus the norm, and branding clarity was up 25%. So that idea of refocusing back on product truth to create your brand purpose and drive it through the mix, really starting to show some positive results. Early days yet to see the in-market results, but the early feedback I've had from the team is positive. The third limiting factor out of the four is neglecting the core, something very close to my heart, having written the only book on the subject of core brand growth. This is something that's very close to my heart. I talk about Snow White and her 7 little helpers, and you can see here this is sometimes what happens, the core being Snow White and the little helpers being a proliferation of smaller products that tend to get launched and distract away from that core business. And the reason this happens, to use another bit of cartoon genius from Tom Fishburne, is an obsession with innovation specifically and launching new products. It tends to be the tactic that marketeers jump into, first of all, when thinking about how to drive growth. We see here, if you like our relish, you can try our new dessert toppings, all-purpose cleaners and easy fit jeans. Any misguided brand extension, 25% off. And there's a real risk from this approach. If you look at this, a real-life example from a project on chocolate, you can see here we start off with a market share of around 6.5%. We have a launch of NPD, which is the yellow line, and you can see how that NPD did drive some growth, but at the expense of the core business. So the net result is that after the period you can see here, we've actually got the same total size of business, we've just fragmented it across multiple product lines. And this is the risk, that we divert attention and we divert resources away from our beautiful core onto this other bit of new product development. So we sacrifice the core for the new products. What we really want is to have core innovation. This is all about making what's strong even stronger. Red Bull being the perfect example of this, pretty much a mono product brand, the blue and silver can with the red logo. What they do is lots of marketing innovation, whether that be shows, events, films and content, which are all talking about that core product. And a story on how this has been applied is Steve Brass. He was, when we started working together, the European marketing director. As a result of the work he did, he was then moved up the business and is now the actual global president of the company. And WD-40 is a brand all about job done right. It's all about getting jobs done, whether that's repairing something, lubricating, stopping a squeaky door. And for decades, it was pretty much the blue and yellow can with the red top. A simple product, as you can see here, and it had a red straw that was taped to the side of the can. That was pretty much it. Now, what WD-40 did is an amazing job at core innovation. In particular, harnessing the power of packaging formats to find new ways of delivering that core benefit and helping people get the job done right. You can see here the Smart Straw product, which integrates the little red straw that used to get lost. It flips up like this to allow you to direct the spray into a specific place. If you put the straw down, it actually gives you a wide spray. So some real added value functionality to help you get the job done right. And then an even more sort of innovative packaging format for the core product, the Easy Reach, where you can see it has this bendy straw that allows you, as the advert says here, reach the unreachable. So getting into even more difficult places in order to spray the product. So we're sticking to the core, but we're renovating it and delivering it in new and relevant ways. And this delivers what I call a double whammy benefit. On the one hand, it's driving penetration, which we know from the work of Byron Sharp and How Brands Grow is the key to driving growth. So it's driving penetration by attracting new users, by seeing the new news about the functionality delivered by those products. But it's also driving premiumization. When we look at the traditional can and we compare that to the Smart Straw, for example, we're talking about a 50% premium per milliliter. So a significant price premium justified by the added value delivered by that new format. And the great news for the brand is that not only is this driving penetration, through premiumizing at a higher price per mil, it's also driving profitability for the brand. And we can see over the last 5 years how the business has grown nicely. by about 27%, which for a fairly mature category and a fairly mature brand is very good going. That was through the packaging innovation we've talked about, behind that driving geographic expansion, and also selectively stretching the brand into new product categories. So let's now turn our attention to the fourth limiting factor, which is inconsistent marketing. Now, a lot of teams, not all teams, but a lot of teams we see still tend to do marketing in a fairly conventional way, which is silo-based. So what this involves is thinking about different activities such as advertising, in-store marketing, events, social, online, and looking at that over time across different initiatives. And this can lead to fragmentation because we're not getting all the different elements of the marketing mix working together. So you can see here a real-life example. This is from Vodafone in South Africa, and we can see here different types of execution, different typefaces, different types of brand property, different types of claim. So everything's sort of working in a slightly different direction. And this means that we're not fully effectively building distinctive memory structure that's going to get our brand recalled and make it famous. So a way to address that problem is an approach that we call chapter planning. And what this involves is, rather than telling different stories with different elements of the mix over time, we try and stick to telling one story and having one set of unifying brand properties. And here we can see the example of this, which is the best example I often use, which is James Bond. We can see from the 60s to the 70s, the 90s, up to date, consistency in terms of positioning. James Bond beats the baddie to save the world, but also consistency in terms of brand properties, whether that be the car, the gadgets, the technology, the locations, the catchphrases, the characters. So here we see chapters of a story building over time and building memory structure, and within each of those chapters we get those different elements of the marketing mix that we saw working together to amplify one single chapter. So rather than the horizontal marketing mix going across, it's almost like we're flipping it and we're creating a series of chapters where the marketing mix is amplified within that specific chapter of activity. And a growth story here to talk about Andrea Quay. She was the marketing manager for AB InBev's business in South Africa, successful in the business, and then became VP of marketing for the whole Africa region before last year leaving. Actually now has gone to work for Coca-Cola in a global role. And the brand we're going to talk about is Castle Light. This is a brand of slightly lower alcohol beer. So it's a 4% beer compared to 5%, which is the average for most beers in South Africa. And it had been traditionally, historically positioned on the idea of responsible drinking. So make the right choice was the sort of brand idea and the slogan. And it was all about, make the right choice, be responsible, be careful about what you're doing. So a fairly conservative positioning that didn't really create a lot of growth for the brand. And the first step of creating a chapter plan is to have a unifying idea and brand properties. And in this case, a new brand idea was created. It was about unlocking extra cold refreshment. So tapping into the refreshing taste of the product, but then also emphasizing the idea of extra cold refreshment to make it even more refreshing. This was delivered through investing in fridges in the trade, and also, as we'll see in a second, launching technology of different forms that enabled the consumer to make sure that their beer was as cold as possible. And this tapped into a really relevant benefit in the market, which is refreshment, but delivered it in a distinctive, fresh way. And as we saw with the James Bond example, step 2 is to create this turbocharged marketing plan with a series of chapters. And those chapters have a consistent brand positioning, which was unlock extra cold refreshment. And then they also have consistency in terms of brand properties. So through the end line, through the colors, the ice cold visualization, and the typeface. So We had a first chapter which was knowing when your beer is extra cold. We had a second chapter which is all about, and that was the first one was about the actual pack label indicator. So this was the pack label, which was enabling you to see when the beer was extra cold. So this allowed you to, when the beer got to -4 degrees, this indicator would tell you that the beer was ready to drink. The second one was extra cold from packaging innovation. And this one had a ice core packaging. So a hexagonal shaped pack that ice would go in the middle when you bought the product, and that would allow you to keep the beer nice and cold. So that was the second innovation. And then the third one, well, the third chapter was an activation campaign that was all about the Republic of Extra Cold. So this was actually creating a activation campaign where they took over a whole island and allowed you to visit the island and experience a whole world of extra cold refreshment. So there we see a turbocharged plan which has extra power through the fresh consistency that was created. So consistency through the brand properties and the brand idea, but freshness through taking different angles on that brand idea. And the impact on this, as we can see, was really positive. If we go from 2010, when the repositioning started, the chapter planning work started around 2012, and we can see there that over the total period, the brand actually trebled in volume, so a real turnaround and a significant driver of growth on that brand. And having gone through those 4 steps, what we're then able to do is to pull together a brand-led growth plan. So rather than just having a positioning, in this case we're looking at Costa Coffee, so rather than just the brand purpose, which was about inspiring the world to love great coffee moments, that was the brand purpose positioning piece that people often focus on. But what we also want to have is a true growth plan. So starting with the current position, looking at the ambition, which in this case was a global coffee brand with 1.6 billion of sales, and then pulling together both core initiatives, such as upgrading the retail presence, regional expansion, and then selectively stretching, in this case, into at-home coffee and also ready-to-drink coffee drinks. And that way, we pull together this comprehensive growth plan that you can then pitch and present to your senior management team. So, what about achieving your full potential to drive growth? How do we go about doing that? Well, I would suggest that in order to do that effectively, what you really want to have is a comprehensive, practical approach in order to produce the sort of growth plan that I talked about. And that will deliver these 4 key stages of growth. Focus on the one hand, then having a clear purpose, using that to drive core growth that I focused on today, and also selectively stretching your brand. So we're not saying that you shouldn't ever stretch and innovate, we're just saying do that selectively and strategically. And then creating that turbocharged marketing plan. And I've found in my experience, using the examples of the leaders I just looked at, that it's that type of comprehensive, practical, end-to-end approach that you need to really fulfill your full potential as a marketeer. Now, of course, there are different ways you can do this. So one choice or a second choice. The first choice, of course, is you can spend time and effort figuring it out for yourself. You can do that with yourself and your team. That's absolutely fine as a way of doing it. Or you can fast track your progress. And this is what I just want to briefly talk about before we move on to the Q&A session. And the way that you can fast track that, if you want to get our help, is through the Brandgym Mastering Brand Growth Program. So this is principles and tools that have been proven on projects for 1,000 leading brands, and it's structured around those 4 stages that we've just looked at. So we start off with focus, looking at how brand-led growth is created and how to focus your portfolio, a bit like the example on Momentum Metropolitan. We then look at insight and using that as a springboard to create a clear purpose and positioning, like we saw on the BN brand. We then go into how to use that positioning to inspire core growth, and then also how to selectively and strategically stretch your brand. So a bit like we saw in the example with WD-40. And then we move into the action stage, so turbo marketing plans like the one we saw for Castle Light, and then pulling it all together into a growth plan like the one that we saw for Costa Coffee. And the benefit of this approach is, first of all, to take a comprehensive view of brand growth, a real end-to-end growth. So some of the feedback here from past participants, we've got Tunahan here from a company called Tadim, a mind-opening way to learn new trends and tools and rethink the fundamentals. So really going and looking at it from the beginning to the start, of the brand growth process. Practical. So very much the emphasis is on practical stuff you can really use on the job. So here, Christian, who's the Jägermeister UK Marketing Director, talked about an excellent combination of state-of-the-art principles and practical tools, and then growth-focused. So this is not about brand management, it's about brand growth. That's what makes it a little bit different from other programs out there. So a strategic, insight-led approach to marketing pays, how Jan Lecramp described it. He was the guy I talked about on the Pladis France BN project. And you'll get to apply the frameworks in real time. So there's on-demand content from about 60 brand growth cases. We have a practical toolkit that you use to apply those principles on a brand of your choice. And then we have a series of 5 live Zoom workshops where you get to meet with me and talk about the principles and also connect with your fellow participants on the program in order to boost your brand growth confidence. So we measure that before and after. So before, people were at a score of 42 out of 100 and they ended up at 76 out of 100 on average. So that's a nice 86% boost in the confidence to achieve your full potential to create growth. So a lovely quote from Georgina here from AB InBev: "My confidence in brand growth has skyrocketed. Any marketeer would benefit from the program, no matter how senior." And we've had 260 participants from leading companies in 2021, from people like Jägermeister, AB InBev, WD-40, Kraft Heinz, ITV. So some really nice companies who have put people in the program. And the good news is the feedback has been positive. So we've got a +70 net promoter score. That's how likely people are to recommend the program. Compares very favorably to the industry average. The top 50 Fortune 50 companies in America are around +10 to give you a sort of comparison point, and Apple's about 60. So 70 is pretty good. And 98% of people saying it'll help them be more effective in their job, inspiring them with new concepts and boosting their brand growth know-how. And the next program kicks off on the 19th of April, so you're getting an avant-premiere of the program. And the offer I promised you, a limited offer for participants for you guys today, is a 20% off code that I'll email you afterwards as well, webinar20. That will give you 20% off the cost of the program. And I did work out that if you work it out on a per day basis, that means the program will cost you about the same as a Starbucks cappuccino. So I would hope you feel that it's worth a Starbucks cappuccino a day to invest in boosting your brand growth capability to allow you to achieve your full potential, to grow your brand, to grow your business, but also then to grow yourself personally, like the examples of the leaders that we've seen today. So that's it in terms of presentation. So we'll now go on to a bit of Q&A. So if you haven't done already, if you just click on that the Q&A button on your screen there, you can ask a question. So please do click and ask questions. The last webinar we had provoked some really interesting debate, so would love to hear the questions that you have to share today. So over to you, Cameron, to lead that session for us. We'll just spend about 10 or 15 minutes doing that.
Perfect. Yes. So we've already had quite a few questions come through. So we'll go ahead and get straight into those. So the first question, David, you talked about the 4 limiting factors in your experience. Wait, let me reword that completely. You talked about the 4 limiting factors in your experience, which is the most important to work on? And that's from John H. So thank you, John. Okay,
that's a great question. I think obviously the 4 the four limiting factors, or you flip that into the four growth drivers, work together in a comprehensive fashion. I think if I had to pick one of those, I think probably that positioning and purpose piece is probably the most critical, because if you get that brand positioning right and you're clear about what your brand is all about, where it's heading, what your values are, what your purpose is, it does tend to have a multiplier effect on everything else that you do afterwards. So rooting that in insight, about your brand truth, the human truth, the cultural truth, is really, really central to that whole concept of brand-led growth. And if we don't get that right, then the rest doesn't really follow. We can have the right focus, try and do the marketing plans, but if we don't have that bit in the middle. So I guess in that four-step program that I talked about, that insight-led purpose and positioning is probably sort of the beating heart of the overall program and the overall approach.
Perfect, lovely. So next one. So this is from Clarice. Great case study, she says. How can the Brandgym model be adapted for a startup or a new brand launch where there is little budget for insight and marketing campaigns? What are the main steps we cannot avoid? Thanks.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's a brilliant question, and I actually suggest that if you're a small brand or a startup brand, this sort of approach is almost more important than if you're a big brand, because we've got to make sure that we're really, really maximizing both the ROI. Now, the ROI side, there might be limited, as Clarice said, there might be actually limited investment in terms of money, but we've certainly got to maximize the ROT, which is the return on talent of the founders and the team. And I've applied this process with relatively small brands. So, for example, on the last brand program, we had a lovely brand called Sauce Shop. They're competing against some of the bigger brands in the saucer space. And certainly the feedback from Pam, who is the founder, is that process was really helpful to get the right focus. So making sure she's really focused on the right priorities, making sure the positioning is clear, that they're growing the core, and then that the marketing plans are working effectively. And it might just be that the marketing mix elements are different. So, for example, upweighting of, for example, social media, not probably being able to afford TV. But the principles actually, I would argue, apply just as well to a startup brand or a brand that's launching as they do to an established brand.
Lovely. Right. So we've got another one here. What sort of time frame is needed to turn around a brand that is in decline? That's from Philippa.
That's a great question. So, a real life example of that is, you can see at the moment, like for example, Peloton, that brand that a year ago, we actually talked about a year ago how that was doing well, and they've had a lot of problems in the last year. So, real life example, and we've worked on other examples on Brandgym projects that have faced that. I think you do need to have some patience. I think if you've seen something that has gone into decline, in my experience, you have to go through 3 phases. The first phase is actually to stop the decline. The second one is to stabilize and then to get into growth. So a brand we worked on, Carling Black Label, is a South African beer brand as an example. My Brandgym partner, John Goldstone, worked on the Hovis brand of bread in the UK. So I think to answer the question, you're looking at probably 8 to 12 months to stabilize, another 6 months to probably to reverse the decline, then another few months to stabilize. So you're probably looking, you need to be patient and probably have a sort of 12 to 24 month time frame, in my experience, normally, to actually really achieve that turnaround, unless you can pull out of the hat some game-changing, breathtaking innovation. So Apple's often used as an example with the iMac. If you have like a wonder product that can really blow the doors off, you could accelerate that process. But probably if I was a brand manager or a brand leader, I would be looking to really manage expectations within the business and have some patience and some stamina in order to stabilize, stop the decline, stabilize, and then go back into growth. So you're probably looking, in my experience, at 18 to 24 months rather than 3 months, for example, to make that happen. And managing expectations, I think, is really important, because senior management would say, if you're a brand director, you've put in place that marketing mix, why aren't the results happening in the next month or 2 months? And that doesn't tend to happen.
Lovely, perfect. So we've got a few more questions, and keep your questions coming in. Please just use that Q&A down the bottom of the screen and click and then you can type any questions there, or you can use the chat to just to have any comments, because it's always nice to read out comments. So we'll go on to the next one, swiftly on. So this one, so how do you feel your approach compares to How Brands Grow approach of Byron Sharp, which you reference? He never seems to be any great fan of positioning.
Oh my God. So I don't know if people on the webinar have been following what's been happening on LinkedIn and a smaller extent on Twitter, where I seem to have prodded Byron Sharp and made him very, very angry. I did a blog post talking about the practical learning from applying the principles of How Brands Grow over the last 10 to 11 years. And that provoked a very angry response from him. He was very unhappy about the fact someone was actually applying the principles in his book, which was quite surprising. So in terms of How Brands Grow, I think we would certainly apply some of the principles. Particularly, I talked about penetration is really important. In the turbo marketing, the idea of creating distinctiveness across time to build your memory structure, which is one of the terms in How Brands Grow. So the idea of penetration, distinctiveness, memory structure, absolutely central. On positioning and targeting, we have a slightly different view. We would say in terms of positioning, it helps to have a core target in mind when you're creating your brand positioning. That doesn't mean to say that you're limiting appeal. You can use that to drive broad reach, which is a How Brands Grow principle. But certainly the idea of targeting and positioning is one that we've found to be absolutely vital and essential in order to inspire the creation of that distinctive marketing mix, which is what he'll be talking about. The problem, I think, if you don't have that clarity of positioning, is that you can end up with the visual symbols that are talked about a lot in How Brands Grow, but you're going to lack a sort of heart and a soul at the center of your brand, and you're likely to end up with a bland mix rather than a brand mix. So my overall summary of that is there are certain elements of How Brands Grow that we think are really powerful, but like all marketing, we recommend that you blend it with other elements. And one of those that's missing, for example, How Brands Grow only talks about volume growth, whereas I talked about on WD-40 the power of doubling up penetration, but also premiumization through premium range extensions. And that is the idea of actually premiumizing and getting more value per unit is completely missing from How Brands Grow. So that's something we have to add into our approach. So some of How Brands Grow, but using that as one way to figure out actually how to grow brands. So we're more interested in flipping it around. Rather than How Brands Grow, it's about how to grow brands.
Fantastic. Right, so I think we've got two more left, but we'll go with this one first.
Okay.
So this one is from Joe, and Joe has said, hello, this was extremely relevant for me managing a global range of food supplements. The challenge of trying to grow through NPI is fragmenting our business and losing focus. What is your recommendation for a smaller company or brand to gain scale?
So I think it's about the balance. So what I found, this happened on a project last year for a big food company, is when you go in and analyze the business, and I think that's the first thing to do in a business, whether it's big or small, is to follow the money. So actually to look and analyze the business in terms of where is the big bit of business, where is the most profitable business, and what's growing. And if you visualize that for your senior team, often you have a real aha moment, because people go, oh my God, look at these bits of the business which are really, really big and powerful. And there are lots of smaller bits where we may be applying attention and actually, applying marketing monies and sort of fragmenting our resources. So I think that's the first step, is just follow the money, in order to really visualize where the growth is coming from. And then the second thing that you have to do, and this is quite hard, is to try to raise the profile of growing the core and showing examples of how you can do that. So when we work on the brand growth program, for example, we have a core growth driver tool. We work through as a team with the participants on the program, 8 specific steps that you can go through to maximize the core growth. So in the case of the business that was mentioned, identifying what the core is and then really systematically maximizing the growth you can get out of the core business before then looking at selectively stretching. And that's the next bit of the program where you look at how to selectively stretch. So how to really focus on the brand stretch opportunities that have the best opportunity to build the business and also build the brand and build on your capabilities. So it's that sort of focused, strategic, follow the money approach which I find helps teams, and just rebalancing. It doesn't mean to say we're never going to do any innovation again. Absolutely not. New products have a role to play, but what it is often rebalancing between NPD, so new product development, and innovation, and growing the core, and getting that balance maybe rebalanced a bit more to growing the existing profitable big bits of business that you have.
Lovely, perfect. Right, so I think we've got one more, and this one's quite a nice one because it's about the program itself. So this one's from Adam. How is your program different to other more established ones like Mini MBA in brand management?
Okay, yeah, good question. So we're definitely, a challenger brand in this space. We started the first program a year ago and have done 5 versions of it, 5 programs since then. I think the biggest single difference is the practical nature. So if you want something that's very academic and very theoretical, with an exam at the end, for example, the program I've talked about wouldn't be right for you. If you want something that's practical and very much something that you can apply immediately, this is more for that. This would be more appropriate, because the principles are brought to life with real life examples rather than academic theory. So we have 60 case studies that we use to bring to life the principles. And then the nice thing is that using the tools which have been proven on 1,000 brand growth projects, you apply the principles in real time onto your brand of choice as you go through the program. So week by week, you're learning the principles, but then building a toolkit for your brand that you come out with at the end. So rather than coming out at the end and taking an exam, you come out at the end with a brand growth toolkit that you've built over the course of the program. So it's that sort of practical, applied focus on brand growth as opposed to a theoretical academic approach to brand management, which, for some people is what they want. They want the academic side, but we're very much more principles, tools, application, and boosting your confidence to achieve your full potential in terms of effectiveness on the job.
Lovely. I think that's all we've got question-wise. I'll leave it, if anyone wants to just throw a last one in that Q&A or the chat straight away, or maybe leave. We've got a couple more minutes left, so otherwise I'll leave it to David to round up.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks very much for everyone who's joined us today for the workshop. Hopefully you had some good inspiration already about how to achieve your full potential to drive growth for your brand, for your business, and for you yourself personally. I'll be dropping you an email to the people who've attended today to share with you a link to the recording in case you want to share that with anybody, and also that special offer for the Mastering Brand Growth program, which kicks off in a few weeks' time. It'd be fantastic to see some of you on that program to really start to apply these 4 steps in the comprehensive practical framework I talked about to drive growth. So thanks very much. Have a good rest of your day, and hope to see a few of you soon on the Brand Growth program. Thanks very much.